second candidate, of course, taking the, well, chair today rather than the stand. Judge President of the Supreme Court of Appeal, Mandisa, answering questions around gender, also answering questions around corruption, and then, of course, her vision for the judiciary. Joining us now to get another view on all of this is Erin Bates, a legal writer at Business Day. Erin, good evening. I really do appreciate the time. Thank you. The question of gender has sort of started hanging over this all day from late yesterday, coming back again this morning. Judge Meyer being asked about, gender issues, transformation issues. And yet, I mean, I don't know how much a Judge President of the Supreme Court of Appeal can really be held responsible for those issues.
I think that's fair to a point, Stephen, but at the same time, she also gave many examples of the work she's done to try and push the transformation of the legal system in South Africa in terms of gender, giving us actual figures for what she's done in the Supreme Court of Appeal and providing detail, and I won't remember the exact numbers, but the details on the demographics of those women as well. So Indian women, black women and white women who've made it to the bench in her court. And so, yes, it is something that's come up chiefly with her today, but we also heard Mbuyiseli Madlanga yesterday having to face questions on transformation and gender. And I suppose it's inevitable in some ways. She herself has said today her gender is important. It's not the reason she's here. She's here because she's a good judge. And in many ways, it seems, based on the Commissioner's response, she proved that. But it is on the table, and I think it's fair game to be up for discussion, not least because you look at the judiciary, some almost 30 years into democracy, we could be doing a lot better.
People have been saying that for a very long time, and it starts at the very beginning of the advocates' well for a long time fraternity profession, because what you had was women didn't get business, they didn't get cases. We heard yesterday about how there was no transformation in terms of commercial law cases. Often the bread and butter of a lawyer is those kinds of disputes. I mean, what we're talking about is a social change, but a change to the entire legal issue. The way that it manages itself is needed here.
Absolutely, and this is too where Maya faced some criticism, because there were figures on how many white judges have been appointed to the SCA in acting capacities. And here I thought Maya was actually quite pragmatic. She said sort of quite candidly, look, we need to admit that there are many seniors, and most seniors in South Africa's legal fraternity, not sorority yet, are white men, and they have expertise in certain narrow areas of the law. And her argument was people misunderstand what they've been doing at the SCA if they use those acting numbers of white males against the SCA. Her argument being basically, let's use them, let's glean their knowledge and integrate that into a mentorship system to really bring women and women of color through the ranks.
I mean, it shows again how complicated transformation is. It's not one thing. It's many different things, many different processes. It also leads to a question, if you change the person, and often a person at the top, rather than change everything else, you don't actually get the change that you need.
You don't, and actually Julius Malema of the EFF here raising the question about if you put a woman, and perhaps a woman of color, at the top, does that guarantee that there will be transformation on the gender score? And of course that isn't the case. You have to look at a person's track record, for example, and I do think from the very get-go today we saw Mandisa Meyer very well prepared, very driven, her saying right at the start, let's get down to it effectively, or let's do this, I think were her actual words. And she's shown us her track record in terms of several issues around transformation, training, and so on.
In a way, it's a big moment today because it is the first time that we've actually seen a woman nominated for this post. We've seen only men up until now. We've never actually had this kind of process unfold involving women. It seems to be a big day for the legal profession as a whole, just on that one basis alone.
It is, and I suppose that's both a joy and a pity that we're here today in 2022, and Maya herself moved at points to recognize how far she's come. I mean, her words at some point were, quote, I'm from the Transkei Bundus, and then you learn that she got a Fulbright, that she studied in the States, that she's got several honorary degrees, that she's worked her way up through the SCA, really brought it into shape and kind of pulled up its bootstraps with the help of her colleagues. And I do think the race now, Stephen, is really, really on. And you'll see that if I may punt my article for Business Day tomorrow, that's the tone of my observance today, is that, Madlanga yesterday, the first candidate, you can't really have a race when you've only seen one person before the JSE, but she set a very high bar, and I think that really does set the tone and the challenge for the two candidates who follow her. It really is a race, it really is on, and she's up to the ante.
Did we have much conversation around her jurisprudence, her actual judgments? You know, what kind? Because I mean, it's important for a Chief Justice because they're leading other judges. They need to lead in the field of writing judgments, judgments that take our law forward. I mean, there's several judgments that go back 20 years that we remember. I mean, there's the Carmichael case, there's the Grootboom case, which is quoted all the time. There are others. In this case, I mean, was there enough discussion about her judgment? Were we too busy focusing on other things?
I mean, as someone who's interested in the law, of course, I'd love for us to spend more time going into the sort of heavy texts of judgments. Of course, Maya's judgment from September of 2020, which she handed down both in English and isiXhosa, that was discussed at some length because of her choice around language. Also, bear in mind that case was between AfriForum and the University of South Africa on the very issue of language. Her saying even there, Johan Fruneman had taken care to try and write judgments in both languages, English and Afrikaans being his choice when he could. So that judgment really came up in quite a lot of detail. The others, not so much, and we could have seen more of that. I know, and you've touched on it in your question, the issue of writing and how judges write their judgments being a key point. You know, can they use clearer language? Can they use simpler language? How do they ensure that it's accessible to the public so that it's not all legalese, and that gap between the layperson, the everyday South African, and our jury or our judiciary isn't so wide?
I mean, there's a lot more to do there about bringing justice to the people. Towards the end of the day, Julius Malema again bringing up the issue of special corruption courts. And I was talking to Dan Mafora a few moments ago from KSAC. I mean, in a way, there's a really good idea behind that. You could get things moving more quickly. You could have people who are well versed in corruption, special prosecutors, special judges. And so on one level, it's a no-brainer. Yes, let's do it. On another level, it's actually in practice quite difficult to do because it's expensive.
It is expensive, and also you've got to bear in mind what is the responsibility of the Chief Justice, what is the responsibility of the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, and what exists already. We know that, for example, there's the special tribunal which was established to deal, and it has chiefly in the last while, dealt with corruption in terms of COVID and getting procurement for face masks, mops, hand sanitizer, soap, all sorts of things. And so the special tribunal exists, there are specialized commercial crimes courts, and then there are all the different courts that we have in existence anyway. So it's like, do you want to invent the wheel, or do you just want to kind of polish up the wheel that exists and really get it running smoothly? And so those are the kinds of debates one can have, but how much of that is really the responsibility and under the control of a Chief Justice, I think may have been overstated today.
The tone of today was so interesting. You make the point that there's already, you know, there's now a race. And what's interesting is that the next two candidates are also very strong candidates. I mean, one runs the real business of justice is in the High Court, and it's in Gauteng. And I'm sorry, Western Cape, I will take your tweets and your letters tomorrow, but it is in Gauteng. Yeah. And so you've got Dunstan Mlambo, Judge President there, who surely is at the coalface in a way of justice. And then we've got the Acting Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo. And you'd always think the Acting Chief Justice is in with a shout.
I think so, and I really do think that, you know, as much as Maya's done a sterling job today, and I think the mood even amongst, you know, sort of people on the sidelines of the Commission, camera people, fellow journalists, delegates, people organizing tea and coffee to keep everyone going, there's an interesting mood at the moment, I think, around this venue, and we may well see that kind of stir a little more when we see the next two interviewees. I do wonder if the likes of Mlambo and Zondo, for example, would have picked up and raised the issue of an absent sexual harassment policy in the judiciary, the very judiciary that presides over cases of alleged sexual harassment, violence, sexual rape, GBV and the like. So, you know, there are nuances in what Maya's raised that her competitors may not raise, but they're certainly strong, they're certainly in the runnings because the president thinks they have a good shot, and they're going to have to prove their mettle when they come under the scrutiny of the JSC and the public at large. And then, poor souls, our commentary after the fact.
They should just block us. I think they do.
Yeah.
There is a thing that also happened today, perhaps a bit more than yesterday, which is that with judges, we read judgments. I don't understand the Latin. I'll phone you for help.
I don't half the time either.
So we don't see them necessarily as people, and that's correct. I mean, Judge Maya, that's a really interesting anecdote about how, as a judge, she drove the other way when she saw the former Premier in the Free State, just deliberately because of their positions. But today we actually saw her, I felt.
I think so, and it's interesting there, you know, remember Zondo was very emotional at one point in his interview to become Deputy Chief Justice. We've seen Maya moved at points here too, and we see that with many judges at points in their interview. And so it's a very delicate balancing act, because you do want to be the kind of person who can stare down a litigant who is errant and hold the kind of authority and poise of the judiciary, but at the same time you're a human being, and our very constitution is so imbued with kind of humanism, the ethics of what are in the Bill of Rights and so forth. And so that human fabric, that human element is relevant, and I think often it is relevant to judgment to a point, maybe less so in sort of strict company law than it might be in other branches of the law, but it is relevant, and it comes up, of course, as an aspect of the interviews.
Erin Bates, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on The Pulse tonight. She is a legal writer at Business Day.